I'm going to explain why reality cannot be a simulation. I see a lot of foolishness on YouTube, videos about this topic that are so misguided. You know, it's popular these days because we live in the sort of computer era. That's basically what the 21st century is, and also the 20th century, you know, the information age. So it's popular to speculate about science fiction scenarios about how, oh, what if we're in a matrix? What if we're inside of a computer, virtual reality? What's going to happen in the next 500 years? Like, Leo, what's going to happen when computers become super fast and then there's AIs and virtual reality gets so good? Isn't it almost guaranteed that we're going to be creating really high quality rendered virtual realities and video games, then crawling inside of them? And then, you know, it's just, you know, it's a small leap in logic to just assume that, you know, if video games keep getting better and better and better, in 100 years, our video games are going to be indistinguishable from reality. And then we're going to find a way to interface with that. And then, you know, before you know it, we're inside a computer and bam, we've got the digital singularity. And then this sounds like so profound. This sounds like it's a profound understanding of metaphysics. And it's not. It's actually, it's a joke. It's a joke. And it gets people thinking in the totally wrong direction. And there's this kind of popular trend on YouTube where people discuss philosophy through these flimsy philosophy videos where people just speculate about, oh, well, maybe it is a simulation. Maybe it isn't a simulation. Maybe God exists. Maybe God doesn't exist. What about this? What about that? This is not how I like to do philosophy. I like to do philosophy and get actual answers. And believe it or not, it's possible to do philosophy and get actual, concrete, definitive answers to profound existential questions like this one. So my radical claim for you today is that it's possible for you to definitively know that reality is not a computer simulation. And I'm going to explain how it's possible to know that. And, you know, it's amazing because there are a lot of otherwise we would consider them intelligent people in the scientific community, within academia, in Silicon Valley, who subscribe to these really silly, easily debunkable metaphysical notions of some digital singularity or some simulation theory. And that's what this is called, simulation theory, the idea that everything can be a simulation. And you have big name, credible people like Elon Musk who subscribe to this theory. There are quotes you can find online of Elon Musk, for example, saying that the chances that we're in a simulation are very high, or if we're not in one already, then the chances are almost certain that we will create one in the near future. And then there are quotes from people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's supposedly very scientifically minded, or he's regarded as such anyways by the mainstream media. You got folks like Max Tegmark. You've got people like Ray Kurzweil. You've got others whose names escape me, but there are academics who actually get grants and funding to research this shit. And that's because they don't know how to think metaphysically about these topics. So anyways, enough bashing of them. I like to bash the materialists a little bit, just because how silly it is. So we're going to break all this down here in a minute. A point I want to make before I forget about materialism. So really, simulation theory is materialism on stilts. That's what it is. It's like materialism 2.0. You know, when the old school materialism 1.0 gets boring and uninteresting, then we got, you know, people bringing out the Matrix and all these things, and it makes it sound as though you're being intelligent and metaphysical and really thinking deeply about reality when you're not. And of course, the Matrix movies that were popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, they played a big role in this too. And, you know, the reason that the Matrix movies were such a big cultural phenomenon when they came out is because it was the rise of the internet, the early internet, and the possibilities for the future and computers was all kind of wide open, and there were these interesting possibilities of what can happen with AI, what can happen with computers and virtual reality and so forth. And so it's only natural that we start to think along these kind of metaphorical lines of like, well, what if life is just a computer or something like this? And so the Matrix movies, though, have some serious metaphysical problems, which we're going to talk about right now. So really, and this is the problem in general with simulation theory, is that it doesn't really understand what it's talking about, because the core issue here, when we're talking about whether we're in a simulation, is we're talking about what is the substance of reality itself? What is reality made out of? And of course, if you're a materialist, the way most people are, then you believe it's made out of atoms or some other material substance, maybe energy if you're a little bit more fluid about that, or maybe numbers and math. Like Max Tegmark has this theory where he thinks that, because he's a mathematician, so he sees the whole world in numbers, and he thinks reality is made out of numbers. And of course, computers are supposedly like made out of numbers. That's what makes computers work and tick. So isn't it only like you put 2 and 2 together and then reality is mathematics, right? That's what it is. No, it's none of that. And you can know definitively, reality is consciousness. There's nothing to reality but consciousness. And what is consciousness? Consciousness is what you and I are experiencing right now. This is it. This is rock bottom. This is as fundamental as reality gets. It's infinite consciousness. Now, that's a very loaded notion. We'll talk about that in more depth. But let's just go back to this idea of a simulation. What does it even mean to say that reality is a simulation? So supposedly that means that right now I'm sitting here talking to you, and you're sitting there listening to me, and like, I guess the idea is that actually this is a virtual reality, which isn't the real reality, because this is being rendered where? Where is the matrix happening? Where is the virtual reality happening? According to simulation theory, I guess it's happening in some sort of computer. But what does that mean? That means it's held in RAM, it's held on a hard drive, it's bits within a CPU, but what is that? What is a CPU? What is RAM, really, if you look at it? Well, it's atoms moving back and forth. It's, bits of electricity circulating around. It's still grounded in a material substrate. See? So if the idea is that some ancient alien civilization advanced very far in their technology, and they created supercomputers that were able to crunch trillions of bits per second and all this crazy stuff, and they developed AI, and they've developed virtual worlds that are indistinguishable from reality, then supposedly they could have stuck us in there, and how would we know that we weren't born into one of those? But of course, you see, all that this does is shifts the problem of the substance of reality. The question here is, what is the substance of reality? It just shifts it back one level. It's the same problem as many theists face when they tout God as sort of the metaphysical origin point of reality. So you ask a theist, well, where did the earth come from? And he says, well, God created it. Okay, well, if God created it, then who created God? Or what is the substance of God? Is God made out of atoms, molecules, chemicals, energy, quarks, numbers, mathematics, equations? What is God? Is God an equation? You see, and then you ask the theist, you keep pushing the theist, and very quickly the theist has no answer, because the theist has only thought one move ahead. His whole brilliant strategy for explaining reality was to posit some sort of entity like a God, but then he has no explanation for the entity itself. But the simulation theorists are doing exactly the same thing, just in a different style. Instead of using a God, they're just using a computer. But the question still remains, what is a computer made out of? What is the simulation that the computer is rendering, what is that made out of? So if this is the virtual world here, so then there's a computer somewhere behind the scenes that we can't see. That computer supposedly is made out of atoms or something, some sort of substance, right? But then what is this made out of? What are my hands made out of? Are my hands now made out of atoms? Well, you can't quite say that because atoms are something that are within the virtual reality. So what are they made out of? Pixels? Voxels? What? What is that? And how does the computer create that? How does a computer that's made of atoms and molecules and bits of energy and so forth, I guess electrons we would call them, that are coursing through that CPU, how is that being turned into pixels or voxels or whatever of this virtual reality? How's that happening? See? And of course, the simulation theorist has no answer to this because there's not even an answer to this question in theory. It's not that they aren't able to like do the science to figure it out. The science, this whole model is so absurd, you can't even do science on it. It's that absurd. You can't even run a philosophical thought experiment on it, really, because it's so stupid. It's a deep misunderstanding of how consciousness works.